class, I said, you need to know your audience.
When are we, and how are we supposed to
I took that to heart.
return these tapes that were borrowed?
I will take, well, you have to watch yourself, so you can return them tomorrow morning.
Well, I don't think there's going to be an opportunity between now and then to watch them.
Oh, yes.
Well, I'll sit down in the day room and watch it right afterwards.
It could be fun.
Yeah,
I want to see the part. Somebody was saying something about this part when I did this.
oh, it is.
But that was pretty
It's on my tape. It's on my tape.
It is
Okay.
ridiculous.
I want to
See how stupid I can be on TV.
Yeah.
The wrong one, actually.
Okay,
I
well,
thought it was
I'm good at
typed.
it because I'm
I
this shit.
Okay. We're
We had a good time
Teacher
with that.
Airman Galloway, our undivided
Oh, yes,
attention.
ma'am.
You betcha.
Completely
Probably one of
undivided.
the few people got the undivided attention.
You better make it interesting because I am one sleepy person.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, he'll jazz you up here.
Negative.
And if you put me on the spot, watch it.
This is the jazz man.
Good user. Good juice master. Airman talking to NCO.
Pretty appalling, isn't it? Okay, we'll support you now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Senior Airman Galloway. As you know, this is our last hour of your class. And what we're going to speak about is a very exciting subject to me, which is Air Force history. Now, the areas that we're going to be covering are the people that are involved, and then we're also going to look a little bit at why it's important for us to know what Air Force history is all about. All right? Now, right now, isn't it kind of hard to believe that we're making history right now?
Not really.
In a small, significant way, everything that we do while we're in the Air Force, we make some small changes. We direct new ways of where we're going to go. As being airmen, going into ALS, you're changing your direction, your course of where you want to go. As future supervisors, you need to understand that you direct our future by the choices you make today, which become our history. I'm going to show a little overview of what we're going to be talking about. Okay. What we're going to be looking at in Air Force history is the development of the Air Force, which is going to be the main topic there. We're going to look at the Wright brothers and their flyer. They were our first course, and we'll see why. The Mitchell era, the National Security Act of 1947, and then finally we'll look at how a knowledge of the Air Force history and how it impacts the military citizen. There we go. You love my writing? I've got beautiful handwriting. Now, if we have time also, I'm going to show you something, and I know you should have completed it. Oh, we got someone who brought theirs in? All right. Okay, that was part of the homework assignment. I know all of you have it there.
Wait a second. The instructor did tell us that we need to bring it.
What we'll do is we'll take that down and maybe break it down if we have some time and go through some little trivia that might be in there, some interesting things that we might have missed there. All right. First area we're going to look at is the Wright brothers and their flyer. Now, does anyone know anything about the Wright brothers?
They're from the greatest state of the nation.
Bicycle shop owners?
Dayton, Ohio.
From Dayton, Ohio, exactly. Yeah.
They
That's
were
where
men.
they originally started from.
They're brothers. They're brothers.
Right? And
They built their airplane out of wood, fabric, and bicycle wires.
We're going to move a little further into that. But we'll start with what we had started there with. They're from Dayton, Ohio. Now, we've got someone that's from Ohio. Do you know anything about the history in that area of what part of Dayton?
It's actually Fairfield.
Actually, Fairfield. Now, I didn't know that. Did anyone?
Well, if anybody's been to Wright Patterson.
Okay, well, I personally didn't know that. I'm glad you told me that. Thank you. All right. Then eventually they did move on to North Carolina. Which is that name of that city in North Carolina they moved on to?
Kitty Hawk, Kitty Eagle.
Kitty Hawk. That's right. And they did that in 1899. Now, does anyone know the reason, which is a very strange reason to me at first, I thought.
There's more hot air down there.
Okay, hi.
The wind.
The wind, right. And that forced them into a development because since the winds were very rough there, they thought they'd bring it down to the Carolinas. And they developed something that was known as, quote, the wind tunnel. Excuse me? Have we got? Okay.
She's walking the barrels
Tonight. Okay.
Would you like me to share that, Joe?
No, that's all right, but we'll talk about it later on after the hour. The wind tunnel, now, that was something else that they developed when they were in the stages of actually talking about building aircraft. Now, how much has that even affected or changed in today's society of the development of something other significant than the airplane itself?
That's, the wind tunnel now is used in the manufacturing of cars to determine the aerodynamics of automobiles.
Anything that moves through the wind.
Exactly.
Well, didn't the writers begin by studying birds? That was their initial.
Yes, that was the initial thing that they had done. They had gotten into the study of flight first.
Well, actually, they were in the study of birds, and they decided the flight was part of it, and then it grew from flight on.
Okay, go ahead.
I haven't, I've never heard of the wind tunnel. I didn't even know they had anything like that. Where was this at?
They had built this in Kitty Hawk, and I don't know the specific details of where they had done it. I know we could check up later on that. You know what I would like to have done with all of these today is I would like to have taken you down to the library. Looking around in there, I was looking for some visual aids, and I started looking at everything that was in there and thinking, wow. Everything that's in here, and why I'm here today is because of something as what the Wright brothers did. And all those spinning offs started happening. But, again, I can't answer that specific, but we could definitely find that out.
Actually, there's down there at Kitty Hawk now, they built an actual wind tunnel. That's where they did all their testing at. And they still have all the stuff there that they, all their Kitty Hawk, and then where the actual point where they started the flight down the hill, and the actual rails are still there for where they guided everything with that. If you ever get over to Nag's Head.
Was it Kill Bevel Hill?
Yeah. Over there at Nag's Head. It's all preserved and stuff. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, we're all finding out something new. Another important thing is, after they got into building aircraft, did they actually start out with just coming out with an airplane?
They built models of their airplane first, did they not?
They
That's
started,
the different models.
they started out with gliders and smaller things. Now, some of their talents came from what you had mentioned earlier, which was the business of
They owned a bicycle shop.
simple
They built
mechanics.
repaired.
And then those mechanics is what they used, and they had that comprehension of knowledge of how things have to work in order to, make a machine that will do what needs to be accomplished. And that's a unique ability that sometimes that people have, and we have those, but just sometimes take the actions. The first plane, the first powered plane that is, had a wingspan of 40 feet, 4 inches, a length of 21 feet, and a height of 8 feet. Now, I had checked on the weight on this. From the notes that were given, it said 605 pounds. But I did find in another text that it did mention it was 750. Now, those are variables that it's kind of really hard to tell. We do still have the original, I believe, up in museums. And, but those are, history's, it's a strange thing. History can be sometimes subjective. We write what we know, but sometimes the facts can be changed here and there, sometimes to fit situations. But overall, we want to know where it's going. And if you know where you've been, it kind of helps you know where you're going.
What was that? What did you say just then?
On,
Where you've been, how
yeah,
you know where
you
you're
kind of,
going? What?
you kind of have to know where you've been to know where you're going. And sometimes they change the facts to kind of point it out. And, we had mentioned the other day, I believe, with you, sir, that back in the colonies, that they rode back to England about all the things that they did here in the United States. Fishing was great, the game was plentiful. But during those times, when history was being written, it was very one-sided, not very objective. And sometimes you have to look at history and be a little objective yourself and know that some variables might change. What was this important date? See if anyone can relate this. December 14th, 1903. What's the date of that first flight? Was it the actual flight, or?
Well, first time they tried to launch it, and it went crashing.
And it did crash.
Yeah, 'cause it was in the spring.
It was actually only a few days later when the actual flight took place. Wilbur was the first one to attempt it, and he crashed. There was some parts broken. But then crashed and burned. But then on 17 December 1903, that's when Orville actually made a flight of 120 feet. 120 feet! Today, what do we look at that as?
Now you can actually put that
Fuselage
inside
of
of
the
the
airplane
C5.
belonged to.
Right.
You can actually put that first flight inside of the C5.
That's really strange how then things happening today seems so insignificant. But things lay down. The Wright brothers had been convinced that the airplane could be used militarily as well. But convincing the government, that was a totally different thing altogether. So they did end up making some changes and working with the government on specification changes. But you know, another thing that I thought was kind of funny is that they actually didn't have the engine made here in the United States. That they had to actually have it done overseas. You would have thought that here, that we're in the industrial age at that time, that they might have started looking at things like that. If you got
Well, the
more
internal
information on
combustion engine really wasn't in high development until right around the 1900s. I mean, Demlin Benz really put the first car on the road in 1898, so the internal combustion engine was still in its infancy.
Right. It was very much in its infancy. And I kind of looked at it as, well, you know, we had some experts here, you know, such as Henry Ford and some of the other people. You thought that there might have been some cooperation there, but they decided to take it overseas and work on it that way. There was one other person, and I wish I would have found out the name, but in the research, there was one other individual that helped them build it. And he was a very significant person also to the Air Force, wouldn't you agree? Because he took part. We all take part in things which are significant, even though they've been small. They sold the first plane to the Signal Corps on 2 August 1909. And that was the hatchling of the Air Force. Now, we weren't the Air Force part yet. We'll get a little bit later on to that. What we're going to talk about next is the Mitchell era. Billy Mitchell. You know, this man, he had some admiration for him. Is that he stood behind his beliefs. He didn't mind rocking the boat, and he gave a lot of personal sacrifices for everything that we do right now today. Sometimes we kind of wonder if we would have that much courage. Now, some people say he might not have went about it the right way, but he got his objective over. He was known as the first and most influential advocate of air power, believing aeronautic services deserved equal status with the Army, Navy, and thought persuasion alone would convince the government. But of course, we talked about it. It didn't quite work out that way. Does anyone know anything about the Dickman Board? The Dickman Board. That was the quotation that was used there.
Was that his court-martial?
That was the court-martial. Exactly. There was a group of people that felt that he was not doing this the right way. And they thought, well, it's time that they brought him down off of his little attitude that he had. And they court-martialed him to his of a rank of a colonel, which still seems to be what? That wasn't much of a knockdown. And then they moved him off to Texas somewhere. Well, they thought that that would kind of hush him up for a while, but then what he ended up doing? Does anyone know from that point?
Where he led the race.
He led what?
That was good. What he had done is he then started doing the propaganda and really working hard on the services, by using the media. The media is a very, very influential tool in history. Wars have been won with media, and they've been lost. It's strange that those influential type of things can impact things. Propaganda has been used throughout the ages. Mitchell changed tactics from an offense to the defense. He went on the defensive side and started seeing things go on there. Public opinion had forced the Navy to allow Mitchell to conduct bombing tests in 1921. The results were not exactly the best as what he thought. What they had used were some actual ships that were confiscated from, I believe, Germany. When they started the bombing, they wanted to see the kind of damage. Now, the ship that was supposed to have used was supposed to be, quote, unsinkable. Well, it didn't turn out that way. It did some damage, but they didn't get the results that they had wanted. In 1924, he published a series of articles advocating the all-out offensive bombardment designed to lay waste on an enemy's entire country. And that was something that, you know, people didn't quite agree with. You're always going to have controversy when you look at personal opinions. Do y'all agree?
You bet.
His supervisors had then struck back and had reduced him to colonel, as we had mentioned there. And after would this be dirigible? Dirigible. The crash that killed a friend, Mitchell accused the Army and Navy of incompetence and criminal negligence. Does anyone know any specific information on that? That was one that was very important to him. He had a personal friend that had died, and he really felt that it was their fault. He was projecting blame, and that again just forced that cause in him to want to fight back even more on that. There's more information, you know, on that. This subject is very interesting to me, but facts have always been something, and I bet all of you can agree. Facts are something that you remember what seemed to pique your interest. And we all have those certain things.
Selective retention.
Selective retention. Although Mitchell had been court-martialed, he still influenced a direction of aviation for years to come. Now, what do you think would have happened if Billy Mitchell, or Colonel Mitchell, would not have pushed the influence of air power?
Eventually somebody else would have, but we probably would have been behind the power curve from like Germany and made the difference in World War II because he was the big proponent of strategic bombing and using the Air Force as an offensive weapon system rather than just observe it, like they did with the dirigibles and the original back flyers that decided to observe the battlefield.
Well, they'll also still be wearing greens and be in the Army.
Yeah.
Right. We could still even kind of formulate to see what would happen. You're probably right that the Air Force would probably have still moved to that. But is there a possibility that if he would not have gone through those efforts, that it could have changed our history as we know it of World War II?
Army Air Force.
Yeah.
We might have lost big time.
Next subject we're going to talk on is the National Security Act of 1947. That was a very significant year for the Air Force because birthday. It was our birthday. We were finally born. We were then separated from the Air Corps, the Army Air Corps. They said finally, hey, we need to be our own force. And that was some very important steps that came about. Now I'm going to give you some information here on some of those specifics on what was included along with that act in 1947. It was President Truman that had signed into law in 26 July 1947 providing for a separate Air Force. It went into effect on 18 September 1947 with the following provisions. That first, comprehensive security programs for the U.S. would be established. Of course, 3 military departments, which would be the
Army, Navy, Air Navy.
right, exactly. Military departments under civilian control. What would that be?
Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary of the Army, Secretary of Defense. Instead of the War Department.
I also looked at would Civil Air Patrol be listed even possibly as one of those military departments under civilian control?
No.
The observation people, I wasn't sure if that was one that was
No, they
listed
fall
in
under
there.
it.
Then, of course, they did create the Secretary of Air Force position, which was very key. The Chief of Staff to exercise command over forces under direction of the civilian authority. Was there anything other significant points in 1947 that were made? This was not in your lesson plan.
Well, along with that, we also got a member on the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
We were also bombed by Japanese later, or no, it was 41, short one. I was looking up there, it looked like.
Same decade.
This is
Close.
a few years. This is after World War II. 8 years.
Right.
Only
They all.
Now, there was something that was a development that all the other service branches had, which was a
five-star.
five-star general was General Hat, which was something that was kind of interesting to me. That it wasn't until then that the Air Force actually. It happened a few years, I believe, after the separation there. But we got into a little conversation with some friends, and we were like, well, he wasn't. The Air Force never had a five-star general because he was part of the Army Air Force. Well, he was, but the separation of the Air Force happened before he got his commission as a five-star general. So what we're going to look at now is how knowledge of the Air Force history impacts the military citizen. I'm going to turn this off just for a moment. I'm going to show just an example of how I see history going.
You have to understand, there was another little thing put up in Sergeant Board.
There was a little Christmas tree theory that someone had showed me on writing, and I thought, history falls along the same lines. Is that you have the Air Force, and then me, and then we touch people. Have you all seen that commercial? And then so on, and then so on, and then so on. Can you see that each person that we touch then separates into different branches? And then we touch so many lives and so many different events that even just small things affect our history in the Air Force. And that's what I meant from the beginning there, that we all have an effect on history because what we've just said has just become history. Ooh, what a paradox. Yeah. Did anyone ever see the movie Terminator?
Yeah.
Terminator 2 is better.
That was good with me. What was something interesting about that? What was the whole object behind that?
And the way that when he came back to present from the future, turns out that he is the father of the one that he's trying to save, who is in the future.
Right. Right. It was very difficult.
You don't realize that that's what it is until towards the end anyway. But it's like how someone's life can be touched in one way that affects the future so much.
Exactly. It's really kind of strange to think that if he was never born, that would have never continued on. And the same thing with like the Wright brothers, Billy Mitchell. There's a lot of different ways we can touch on it. Why is it important that we as Air Force members know history? Wait, before I get up, does anyone have the time of when we started here? I had not checked that, and I want to make sure I don't run over on your time.
You're 23. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Can you turn down the heat and turn down?
Sure.
I'm going to fall asleep on you.
Yeah.
How about if I open up the door?
That'd be fine.
Is that all right with everyone? Okay, again we were talking on why is it important? Why is it important that we know about our history?
I think one thing is that history is a record. That record contains the mistakes as well as the successes. And if we know history, then we can look back at that and see that we don't make the same mistakes. I think there's a quote from somewhere that says, those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it, or something to that effect. And I think that we can learn from what happened in the past. We were discussing yesterday the fact that when we were talking about the United States, we discussed the fact that many of the things that are happening from within, the drugs and the loose morality and things of that sort. And the application was made that that is what defeated the Roman Empire. No army defeated the Roman Empire. It decayed from within. That we go back and look at that history and then see those same things starting in our country, we can be alerted to the fact if we don't do something to correct it, that same thing could happen to us. We could repeat this history.
You're saying knowing our history, not only got to know your history, but you've got to research it, because a lot of things have been quoted in books is inaccurate.
Exactly.
It's real critical.
Some things have been changed to fit the situations.
Make it look good.
It's hard.
I think one of the biggest reasons we need to know our history is for a sense of pride. I mean, if we're not proud of the organization that we're in, and we can't gain that pride unless we know where we've come from and recognize all the accomplishments that, like Billy Mitchell and others, that succeeded and brought us to where we are today. Those are things that we should be proud of, and we can't be proud of if we don't know about them.
I'm going to show you guys something right here. I looked at it when I read it as somewhat derogatory. Can you see that? I'm going to read this real quick because I want to make sure I get it on there for you. It says, our roots, history, and heritage are deep and rich. They put us where we are going, yet I am convinced that too few of us in the Air Force have a sense of historical perspective. That lets us view the current developments of air power in a broader context. That was said by Lieutenant General C.G. Cleveland. I kind of took that as he's telling us that we've got the capability, but we're not using it. Do we want that to be true?
I think it may be done in a negative context. Quite often, you use a negative context to encourage somebody. Let's change that then. You would do the same thing in a classroom by saying you're not applying yourself as much as I know you can. And that's negative, but the idea behind that is we'll do something about it.
I agree. What it is, and you saying that because there is the ongoing, it used to be, I think, a very big power struggle amongst forces in the Air Force, and so it was a way of trying to gain the extra power and really show what we could do, that we had the stuff to do it with, but we're not using it.
Just say, do we have anything on it?
I think if you picture yourself with Patton as he's looking at Rommel, and he's standing up on the bluff. If you remember seeing Patton, he's standing up on the bluff, and Rommel is out there, and he says, "Damn, Rommel, I read your book." And he had read the history behind Rommel to determine what kind of tactics Rommel used. And because of that, of his knowledge of that history, he knew how to defend that type of tactic.
Son 2, the art of war, know thy enemy. Know their weaknesses and all that, to be able to exploit.
The Air Force, we've always, I guess, taken it for granted for what we all have out here. When we see these F-15s and C-130s flying around, we don't sometimes recognize those people that brought those things into existence. And what's really important there is that we feel that we should always, for those new people coming in, pass on that information, that legacy. It's like the education in your families of letting you know where you came from. That sense of pride that we all should have in ourselves, which is the key word that you used.
I wonder how many of you in here have been to the Air Force Museum in Wright Path.
Tell us a little bit about it. I have never had that privilege.
If you have never been there, it can be the most eye-opening and rewarding experience connected with the Air Force and related to history. Because as you go through there, it's a large area with a lot of different planes. It helps you to put a lot of the things into perspective. It has a lot of history in it. It has a section in there talking about Billy Mitchell. I didn't know who Billy Mitchell was until I went through there and saw some of the things that were in there related to him and the narratives. The only problem that I had was that we were up there for 4 hours and I could have stayed there 2 or 3 days because I wanted to read the legends that went with each one of these pictures or each one of the showcases there, because there was so much history there. And you felt, being an Air Force person, you felt like you were a part of that, and you were discovering, as Alex Haley would have said, we were discovering our roots in the Air Force, and it was exciting just to see where we came from and how it has developed over these years. So if you ever have a chance, but I warn you, plan a couple of days there, because in order to really see it and enjoy it, it'll take that.
Are we a part of it? Absolutely. It's important to me. I mean, I feel there was something that was actually given to me when I was born. I was born as an Air Force corporal, and I'm a guardsman, which is traditional weekend. The letter was dated back in August of 1966. I was born in June. It was a letter to my parents, and it said, "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Galloway, I'd like to welcome your son, William R. Galloway, to the Air Force family." That was telling me that, yes, this is my family as well. And now that you're here, I'd like to make sure that all of you have been welcomed to this family. I think it's really important. Now, the Air Force has our different needs perspective. And sometimes we have to look at us as individuals and see how things can be important to us. Wrap up here. In our summary, what we've discussed is the Wright brothers and their flyer, and the importance of why the plane. We talked about the Mitchell era. What? Tongue-tied on that one. And why his significant contributions were important to us as a power in the air. We talked about the National Security Act, the actual hatching of the Air Force in 1947, and how history impacts the Air Force. Now, if we have some extra time here, how are we doing on time then? Okay. We've got 7 more minutes. Actually, I would like to talk about it, but what I'll wrap up with, and then can we seriously? We'll talk about that. I hope that you all can see how even the smallest things that you do will in fact change what tomorrow can be.